He's in the term.
Close. Yeah. I don't
Except for the
think,
paintings.
yeah, it's a little,
Okay, we're live.
it's great. It's wonderful.
Oh, yeah. We love this room. I see what you're saying. Good morning, everyone. This is the first meeting of the County and Regional Governance Study Committee. And just welcome everyone. Today is Friday, August 23rd, and we're going to get started. First, we're just going to go around and introduce ourselves quickly. Then I'm going to do a little bit of sort of setting the table, and then we're going to do longer introductions and sort of talking about our expectations and our hopes and dreams for this committee or otherwise. But I'm Senator Riccardi. I'm chairing today. Representative Mike McCarthy and I are going to switch on and off, chairing the meetings every other time. And I represent the Addison district.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Representative Mike McCarthy. I represent the City of St. Albans, the Franklin 3 district, and I've been chairing the House Government Operations and Military Affairs in this lovely big room. So
Yeah.
glad to be back in here after a couple of months away. That's for the brief intro.
Okay, cool. Go ahead, Brian.
Good morning, Senator Bob Norris. I represent 12 to 15 townships in Franklin County, and I also represent the town of Elberg and Grand Isle County. And my interests are very much, I'm very much interested in this fiscal project here as to the direction that we're going or may not be going. So I'm just glad to be here.
Ted Brady, the Executive Director of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and I am not a member of this group. I'm a member of the advisory group, which meets next week.
Morning, everybody. My name is Tim Devlin. I'm Legislative Counsel. I am one of two attorneys that works in the Office of Legislative Counsel on government operations. And so this falls into my portfolio. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Morning, everyone. I'm Douglas Farnham. I'm the Chief Recovery Officer. I was appointed last August by the governor following the 2023 floods. I'm not a member of the committee or the technical advisory group, but I'm happy to support both efforts, as a lot of what I've been working through over the last year definitely ties into this subject matter. And hopefully I can help bring information to the table from state or federal groups.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Wendy Harrison. I'm the one of the two senators from the Windham district, and super happy to be here. Appreciate. I'm really looking forward to this committee work. I do have some experience in county government. I won't go into that now, but I think this is a really important topic that is going to touch a lot of areas. So thanks everyone for being here.
Good morning, Representative Mark Higley. I live in Lowell. It's now a 2-seat district with Representative Mike Marcotte. So there's 8 towns: Lowell, Jay, Westfield, Troy, Coventry, Irisburg, Newport Center, and my Lamoille County town of Eden.
Well, welcome everyone. And the seat right here is Representative Julia Andrews, who is the 3rd House member on the committee, and she is not able to be with us this time, but hopefully will be with us in the next meetings. I chair the Senate Government Operations Committee, and I started chairing that committee in 2023. And it was the first time I'd actually been on the committee. So it was like a pretty steep learning curve. But pretty much every bill, or almost every bill, that we tackled during that session, someone would say, oh, this would be a lot easier if we had county government, or if we had some more structured regional government. And that covered a whole bunch of topics. From property reappraisals, we did a bill about reappraising and how it works at the local level. We were working on a bill on ranked choice voting, and the conversation came up with all of the hand count towns. How do we count ballots centrally if we were to move to a ranked choice voting system? We talked a lot about law enforcement at the county level and how we can strengthen and improve law enforcement. We had a long conversation, super fun conversation about dispatch And how do we have a better, more efficient and effective dispatch system to dispatch our law enforcement and our first responders throughout the state. We had conversations about how our towns operate and the services that they provide. And invariably, someone would say, oh, if we had counties that were more effective, we might be able to deliver these services better. We might be able to solve this problem more effectively. And that's not to say that our towns are not doing an amazing job. And it's not to disparage the work that our towns and municipalities are doing and the regional government system that we have. Not to say they're not doing a good job, but what is happening is that there are a lot of towns that have capacity issues that are being asked or needing to do things that they don't have the staff to do, they don't have the expertise to do, and they don't have the bandwidth to do. And therefore, it's really creating the system that, depending on where you live, you get different services or you get different levels of effective services. So this led us on the Senate Government Operations Committee to really think about this issue. And the 6 members of the committee all introduced a bill to create this study committee to really look at the issue of county and regional government. And you'll see on your on the committee's webpage today, this committee's webpage, some testimony that we received from the National Association of County Governments and from the Connecticut Council of Governments, which is the Connecticut version. They don't have county government in Connecticut, but they have a council of governments, and other states also have some sort of council of governments. We are hopefully going to get testimony directly from these organizations in our next meeting or the meeting after, but I wanted to put this up on the website so everybody can take a look at it or listen to the tape if you want to sort of get some base level information about county government. But the Senate Government Operations Committee in particular, and the House Committee also worked on it, but the Senate Committee really dug into this issue and talking about how we could really look at the efficacy of county government in our state and whether or not it made sense to make changes to it, which, as we'll hear from Tim, would require significant legal changes, potentially constitutional changes, because of the structure that our government is right now. So I'm really interested in tackling this. And just so you know, as Doug alluded to, there is a technical advisory group, which is made up of all the stakeholders. So Ted is on that technical advisory group as a member of the League of Cities and Towns. There also are members of other regional governments and members of the Clerks Association, the Sheriff's Association, the assistant judges. So all the county officers are represented on the technical advisory group. And we structured it this way in large part because there are so many stakeholders. This committee was getting to be really big, and the stakeholders were outnumbering the legislators. And our legislative staff was like, we cannot staff a committee that's mostly other people, non-legislators. So we structured it this way so that the technical advisory committee is going to be meeting in parallel with our committee. And sometimes we'll be meeting together and they'll be here with us at the table, providing testimony and their recommendations, but they'll be doing the work. And that is being sort of coordinated by Michael Gaughan, who is unfortunately not able to be with us here today. But he is the executive director of the Vermont Bond Bank. And the bond bank came and testified largely about the capacity issues they were seeing in a lot of our smaller towns. They are the lender for a lot of our town projects, and they see firsthand what is happening in our towns and their abilities to meet their financial obligations, their staffing obligations, and their sort of service obligations. And Michael can talk much more eloquently about it, but he also, that organization, the bond bank, is sort of a neutral. They don't have skin in the game directly, and he was game to coordinate that stakeholder group. So he will be running those stakeholder meetings, and you'll see on our website, just to orient you, that their agendas are under additional information. If you look on the County and Regional Governance Committee website, yeah, and Mike's pulling it up behind Tim's head. To the left side, there's additional information, and that will have the technical advisory group information and their agendas, and then the recordings of their meetings. So that if you want to keep up with what they're doing, Mike, Rep. McCarthy or I, one of us is going to try to go to their meetings each time. So we're keeping in track of them. But just so you know, that's going to be happening in parallel and sometimes intersecting directly with our work. We are required to provide a report next year, and to go into this in more detail, with recommendations. I think it's November 1st, 2025. And so we do have a little over a year. We obviously can extend that if we need to next session. But we want to really dig into it. And Doug will talk a little bit about some other partners who might be able to work with us on this, and some funding possibilities for that work. So that is, and Mike or Tim will go through the sort of legislation that set up the committee and the things we're supposed to look at and discuss in more detail, and we can get into those details. But that's really what the sort of origin story of the committee. So I am really interested in making sure that government works for people, and that government is accountable and efficient and effective for Vermonters. And what we're seeing right now is that it's not always as effective and efficient and equitable as it can be or should be for Vermonters, depending on where they live. And I think we've seen this especially over the last 5 years during the pandemic, and then now again during the floods of last summer and this summer. And in part, and Doug can speak to this much more directly, but in part because the federal government mostly recognizes counties when they're providing it to states. And so we, as a state, have had to really adjust our structure in order to more effectively interface with federal programs, both during the pandemic and also now during the flooding. And we saw that really starkly last year, for example, when parts of counties flooded and they didn't get aid. My own county, we had the town with the highest rainfall in the state of any town, and we didn't get declared. And that was just because it happened to be over the border in a different county. So really thinking about our structures and how we can better interface with the federal programs, especially because we're such a small state that is so dependent on federal aid. So that's the sort of background. I don't have any preconceived notions of what we're going to come up with, but I do want to make sure that we have conversations and really dig into the possibilities of how we could make our regional government more effective. And it doesn't mean creating a third level of government. It might mean taking off some pressure from the local government and some pressure from the state government and moving things up and down, not just creating more government, but creating more effective government. So that's my sort of intro spiel, and I would love to hear more of what you're all thinking, and also what a story that brought you some kind of joy or happiness this summer. And the thing that brought me happiness and joy this summer is my youngest daughter graduated from high school, and we took a mother-daughter trip, and we went to Crater Lake in Oregon. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to Crater Lake. It's so cool. It is so cool. It is the deepest lake in North America, and it was created when a volcano collapsed into itself. So it is really deep, really surrounded by the caldera of a volcano, and the water is insanely blue. It's, I jumped off the dock. It was super cold, like as cold as a Vermont stream in, May. But then when I opened my eyes underwater, it was like swimming through blue glass. It was incredible. So we had a great time. That's what brought me the most joy this summer. So, all right, I'm going to pass it to you.
Great. Well, I'll start at the end with the story and go on the caldera theme, but not in the United States. So my wife for a couple of years had planned this big trip to Greece. And so we got back 3 weeks ago. It seems like a long time ago now, from a couple weeks going to Athens and then being on Santorini for a full week. And Santorini is an island that's part of the ring of a caldera around the only sunken volcano that's in an ocean. So it's in the Aegean Sea. But all these villages with the whitewashed stone and the blue dome churches and shrines, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world, and also with crystal clear water. So I was the only one of us who was brave enough to like jump off the cliff into the deep water, but we did a lot of snorkeling and fun stuff, and that was really great. Things that, to build on some of the themes that we heard on the House GovOps side, many of the same things that you heard in Senate GovOps, the struggles that we had and that we heard from the administration around, not having county government to funnel particular funds that were sort of designed by federal appropriators to go into county governments, and we don't have those bodies or opportunities we miss out on. The thing I might add to the list is around technical assistance. We have tried to work with Mr. Farnham and others to help municipalities get access to the resources they need, solve the problems that they need. And I think what we hear again and again, that there's a bit of like haves and have-nots. So communities like mine that have a lot of staff are able to access all of the things that are available and write grants and receive them and comply with them. And then a lot of our smaller municipalities that might not be as staffed up feel that there's an inequity and that they don't have access to those. And I'm wondering if we can better use our existing regional structures or set out new ones to help mitigate and help solve some of those problems. The other pieces that I want us to have a better understanding of what regional government structures we have now that kind of fill in the gaps now, but maybe ineffectively or in ways that aren't equitable across the state. I think about us hearing testimony that had to do with, a regional planning commission might serve one region of the state that has bigger, robust municipalities in a way that it seems like it works really well. And then in another part of the state, we heard some frustration around, too few staff, too few resources being spread out over too many municipalities, and the struggle to, do things like plan and execute things, or even a fear that some municipalities had of, getting into a grant process to do something they might really need to do. And then what is it going to cost them? And what's the maintenance of that project going to be down the road, and supporting those kinds of efforts. So I think that when we have so much of the responsibility down at the municipal level, there's a lot of haves and have-nots across the state. And that's one of the key things I'd like to explore and see if there are ways we can do better.
Senator Norris?
Yes. Well, I didn't have the opportunity to visit any volcanoes or whatever. I'll be a lone guy out. However, I spent a lot of time with my family, but one incident, or I should have said experience that we were able to, my wife and I were able to enjoy was we were able to go to Cranston, Rhode Island this past summer because one of our grandchildren was in the regional Little League championships down there.
Oh, cool.
So, we get to spend 5 nights, 6 nights, 7 days, whatever down there with my son, his wife, and 3 children, ages 2 to 10, and 11 other teens in the same hotel. So It was an exhilarating experience to say the least. But it was, I'd like to say it's once in a lifetime, but last summer we got to go to Massachusetts with another one of my grandsons who was in the regional league finals. So we're fortunate the past 2 years. I don't think we'll be going back next year, but who knows? My interest in this, because I have some experience in county government, is I've been to numerous tabletop throughout my career. And I've heard several renditions of what the state can and can't do for county governments and so on and so forth. And if what I've come to realize is Franklin County, for instance, is the only one suffering a natural disaster, then the state would put all their efforts into Franklin County. However, having said that, if Franklin County and Will County have a natural disaster, they're going to prioritize their efforts as to which one. So what I've come to realize is that our first responders within our townships and within our counties are the people that we should be counting on the most at this point in time. Not to say if the state won't come in, but if ours is the only incident, that I guess that works to our advantage. But if it's not, then we won't get all those resources from the state that we probably should be getting, such as you're talking about the floods and so on and so forth, because the state can only handle so much. I'm familiar with the federal government and the process, 1976 ruling on Stovey Lamoille, very familiar with that. As to basically they stripped the county of a lot of, they didn't strip them, they just pointed out the fact that they didn't have the authority to begin with. So those are some areas that we were covering there, but I guess I'm curious to see which direction this is going to go in, how we get there. Whether we look at constitutional issues, whether we look at county governance. My first question is, when did we lose county government in the state of Vermont, and why? I can tell war stories on that, but I won't. But I'm interested in the direction that we're going in from a county level here.
Thanks. Ted?
Wasn't sure if I'd be participating. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, the moment of joy is simply a trip to Minnesota to see my in-laws and spend a week on the lake and saw my kid catch 2 massive fish, a big walleye and a big northern. So that hits it all. 7-pound walleye, pretty cool, all on his own. No picture of it, another story. I think from the league's perspective on this work, we get the same stories of towns looking for assistance. Towns feel they're not given the same resources as others to do the same things that the state expects them to do or the feds expect them to do. And as we look at this conversation, I'm hoping that we can all try to find a way to solve the municipality's problems, not the state's problems. And I know that's your perspective, right? You're concerned about how does the state do this more easily? How can the state ensure equitable treatment? Well, from the town's level, they have a lot of issues that they're trying to solve. And sometimes those two things will overlap, right? Where the state and the municipal interests are obviously the same. But I'm hoping we can really look at it from the perspective of towns and say, how do we enable towns to work better together at some higher level? Because I hear that all the time, they'd like to. And there are not enough there's not enough enabling statutes, there are not enough easy ways to do it. There's not enough functional ways to do it where these towns can actually work together at a sub-state but intermunicipal way to solve some problems.
Hi again, everybody. Let's see. Fun memory we just had was my family and I go on an annual hike up Mount Monadnock, and we had some. There's 2 grandchildren, not my own, but involved in the family, which made my mother quite happy to have everybody under one roof in a rented house. But it was a lovely day, lovely experience. Hope to do it again next year. Expect it. My role in the committee is to provide a legal analysis and advice to committee members on what I'm sure will be a wide variety of issues that come up and arise in charting of what the final report will be here and throughout a discussion. What I've provided with you today, I'll get into this, is really just a thumbnail sketch and really designed of county governance. It's designed to really provoke questions. And so that's really what I feel my role is here to both provide answers and legal analysis to the committee, or one-on-one if you have any of the questions. I want to make that apparent from the get-go that very happy to look into anything, whatever depth of detail the committee lacks. Thanks.
My moment of joy is a complicated one, so, but I think it's actually important to share some of the bad things with the good. My wife and I had our 20th anniversary this year, and to commemorate it, we took a river cruise up the Rhine together. First time I've gone to Europe. It was amazing, wonderful experience. It also brought out some of my inherent biases as a Vermonter, seventh generation, the overly artificial landscape of the Rhine. And when I toured Holland and it was super engineered and controlled to every inch, made me, it was repugnant to me, actually. It's beautiful. And I admired the work that had gone into it, but I would not want to live in that environment. So it really brought home my, kind of pulled my own perspective and bias out of me towards the natural environment instead of an artificial one. But the coincidence was that the floods this year from Beryl hit on the day I was in Amsterdam. So I got to experience that initial moment while I was in that other environment where they had tackled their natural environment, and their decision was, we're going to dominate this, engineer it, control it, eliminate all risk, and that's the environment we're going to live in. And it's beautiful in a way, but it's not the way I would like to see personally. So I think that helped me when I came back to the States for, the work I have to do going forward. Since I joined the state, I actually joined the state after my military service. I joined the state on the day that Irene hit.
Wow.
I was starting at the tax department and I was former military. So I called my supervisor and said, I'm ready to come in, and she said, no, do not walk in. You would be trying to, come across floodwaters. And I was like, well, I'm trained to do that. I've done it before. I can come in if it's helpful. She's like, no, absolutely not. Do not do that. It's like, so, and since then I been property director, a couple other roles. I've always had a perspective of focusing on the state's interactions and interconnections with municipal government. So I'm particularly happy to see this committee being formed, and I look forward to trying to support it as much as I can.
Really? Thanks. Good stories. So I want to talk about Amsterdam, but I'll talk about that later. But this summer, we had a lot of visitors. And the first of those were two older women from Florida who came, my aunt and my dad's widow. And they had never been to Vermont. And I had told them about it. And I've been wanting them to come for ages, and they finally did. And the peonies were in bloom, and we walked all around. I live in Brattleboro. It's very walkable, and it was just so fun to show them Vermont and just the natural. When I drive up here, it's stunning, even in bad weather. It's just terrific, and my dad's wife has wanted to go to King Arthur flower forever. She's used that flower for decades. And so it was really fun. So regarding this committee, my background has been in local government. I've been in local government really my whole life as a staff person, as a council member in Florida, in New Jersey, up here. And so I've been a town manager in Rockingham, Bellows Falls, which is a twofer job because it's a village and a town. And then I was interim in Vernon and interim in Winooski. And I am just so struck by the difference in towns and the personalities that towns have. And I think that's just so important because people can live in a place that suits them, and the personalities are real, and they're fascinating. So when we look at municipalities, they're not all of one type. Obviously, they have different levels of capacity and need, but I am so impressed by how the residents take responsibility. And I had one council member in a town who said, I don't want a staff report. I want to learn it by myself. And I was just shocked, coming from places that were larger and where staff reports really matter. Folks want to do it themselves. And there's a real sense of just ownership, community. People want to help, but they don't want to be in their neighbors' faces, right? I mean, we respect each other's privacy. And I just value that so much. And I think Vermont towns have been able, until floods and really huge disasters, they have been able to handle things at a community level. By and large, it's obviously more difficult to do now, and we do need to look at other structures, physical structures, and then also just governmental structures to make things easier for them. But I want us to be really thoughtful and strategic and intentional when we look at potential solutions. Let's really identify the problems in detail so that we don't create some other problem down the road. Because in Florida, I worked for a county government. I was solid waste director for a county, and county of 100,000, and that county functioned very differently from the county just to the south where I live that I interacted with, which is Palm Beach County, which is pretty big, has double the residents of Vermont. And sometimes as a municipal person in a big county, there would be a barrier between the town and the state that was very difficult to get around. So in some circumstances, it was easier to call the state, other circumstances, it's easier to call the county. So it can really get very complicated very quickly. So I think we need to be strategic about what we propose, and I'm curious about how we're going to actually structure a contract, but we'll get to that later, I'm sure. But what I've noticed in Vermont is financing obviously is a big deal, and so I'm so glad that y'all chose to have the bond bank integral to this. Utility financing is really a challenge, and it's really hard for smaller towns to do that. But I serve on the Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs Committee, so we've done a lot of work on housing, and having water and sewer, especially both, is critical to having meaningful, dense development, not overly dense, but charmingly dense, so that we can keep the landscape the way it is. So how we finance that infrastructure is critical. And I've seen some examples of kind of private financing, private-ish financing of utilities, and that I have concerns about. In Vermont, where people have used fire districts as a way to finance infrastructure. So I think that's something, just those general financing mechanisms. And I think sometimes for a town, like when I was with some of the towns here, it can be a real challenge to get something done, but in some circumstances, the state could actually make its processes easier for towns. Stormwater utilities is something that comes to mind. I wanted to do a stormwater utility, and that was really hard to even just find the statute in enabling legislation. So I think we should also not be hesitant to look at state processes that we could make simpler. So it doesn't all have to be, there doesn't have to be one solution for each problem, obviously. I know everybody knows that, but I think the more strategic and intentional we can be with really good explanations and descriptions of the problems, and from multiple viewpoints, from a town, from residents of the town. I'm glad we're going to have the county folks here to tell us how things look from their perspective. But and then there's the agencies that are they're not delegated, I'm not sure what the right word is, but when the state contracts with folks, like the transit agencies, the health agencies, like HCRS, those those groups, it would be helpful to discuss how that relationship is working, because some of those are really doing the state's work in a region. And I've seen just interesting patterns, but all different from each other too. So I look forward to having these conversations.
Well, I also think that so many of our towns are so unique in so many ways. I know I've been a select board member in Brattleboro, Vermont, believe it or not, in the 80s. And then I've been a lister in the town of Lowell for 30 years. And of course, I knew Mr. Farnham through your PVR service and had many conversations in regards to that. So I'm pretty concerned about the direction we may be heading. I'm glad to hear you say that, we're not going to create a third arm with the government. I'm concerned again that, if we're talking about all these things that towns have to continue to do, we as a legislature need to understand that in advance of the laws that we pass. And I think we're doing too much of that. We're relying on too much of that. I mean, an example of individual towns, I mean, my town of Eden doesn't have zoning. And they're getting along fine with that. The listers finally gave up, and that's a thing that's hard across the state. But I certainly have heard from other listers that the information that the state wanted to kind of take over the reassessing was a real concern. And I'd even talked to the new assessor in Eden, asking me some questions about how we should proceed going forward. And he wanted to send out a letter every year to the townspeople asking them what they've done with their property. And I said, good luck with that, So again, it's a local job, and it should stay that way, in my opinion. Again, I hate to see any loss of local control. When you're talking, I think you mentioned it too, about towns and what they do when it comes to disasters. A lot of people don't know, but in 1997, the towns of Lowell and Montgomery got flooded out really bad. And we lost 3 bridges in town. Montgomery, you may have heard, lost so many of their main street sort of businesses and so on. And what I remember from that was every person in town that had a 1-ton dump truck or a tractor or whatever. And I don't, it's just amazing to me too, that I noticed even there was a Facebook ad, I don't know if it was from the Vermont Natural Resources Council or whatever, talking about the latest floods, and it's big ad that says, oh, if you're flooded out, you need to, you can only clean up an area so many feet from your house, and you can only use manual equipment and blah, 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 and anything further you need to get a permit for. And that sort of thing really didn't go over well in my area. So again, I'm really appreciative of being on the committee. I think I have a perspective from many years of local government that I can contribute to. As far as enjoy this summer, thanks for letting us know in advance, because gave me an opportunity to think. But I have a 92-year-old mom and a 92-year-old friend of my mom's who are amazing. They winter in Alabama. He's from Wisconsin. He's a Korean vet. They have a camper that they take from Alabama to Wisconsin, leave that there for a couple of weeks and stay and visit his family, and then they come here for the rest of the summer. So what my wife and I have done actually for the past few years, and it's really amazing, is probably 3 or 4 times a week we go over and spend a couple hours and just listening to the stories of folks that are, I'm getting to be an old timer as well, so I kind of contribute to the stories too, but it's pretty amazing to listen to the stories. And my mom grew up in Proctor. Her family were Swedes that came over and worked in the marble quarries. And so there's a lot of history. And Fran, who's from Wisconsin, again, was a farmer initially, but worked for a Drott company and I think it was Caterpillar, one of the others. But So there's quite a perspective across the country that I hear quite a bit about. I'm certainly appreciative of that.
Cool. Mike, I skipped you the first one. Sorry.
Oh.
Why don't you go tell us what you're doing for the committee and what we're on the agenda, please?
Okay, Mike Ryan, Director of Legislative Operations and Committee Assistant for various study committees, including this one. For this committee, I will maintain the committee website with documents and presentations that are sent in. I'm that point of contact for those administrative duties. I'll continue to Zoom and live stream meetings for the public, which are archived on the study committee's YouTube channel. And anything else that the chair requires as far as scheduling witnesses and creating the agenda and maintaining the technical assistance group information on the website as well. My moment of joy, I had many. The summer was an amazing summer, one of the best ever. The most recent one though is I went to the Fish Festival down in Delaware this past weekend, and it was everything I had hoped it would be and more. It's been 20 years since I saw it as a festival, but I've got over 100 shows under my belt now, so
Oh, my
it was a good reason to just take care of Mike for a weekend, and some buddies and mine and I, we got together and we had a good time down in Delaware.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Wow. Well, I love all those moments of joy. I'm glad that people had time to travel and see important people and have some time away from here. Thank you, everyone. Does anyone have questions for each other or anything to add at the moment before we jump into? Okay, cool. Good enough. Okay, all right. So we're going to turn over to Tim, who's just going to take us through the enabling legislation, which should be on the website.
Yes.
And then also the memo that he wrote that I sent you last night and is also on the website about the status of local government in Vermont. So go ahead, take it away, Tim. Whoops,
Chair,
sorry.
would you like me to share this on the screen while we go, or keep it with the group?
What is your preference, everyone? Do you want things up on the screen, or you have your own way of looking at? Everybody seems to have a screen. Do you have a screen with you, or are you?
I don't, but I'm fine.
Okay. I think it's okay that we just look at it on our own devices and paper, so.
Don't appreciate it.
Yeah, for the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. So committee members, the enabling authority for this committee can be found in S-159 or Act 118, an act relating to the county and regional governance study committee, which this is. There are three main facets to that bill. It creates this study committee, it creates a technical advisory group, and then it also requires a federal disaster funding for county and regional governments report to be produced by the Secretary of Administration. Starting off with the purview and powers of this committee. If you happen to be following along, this is in section 1A. I'll just start with creation. This committee is created to address local government capacity challenges, enhance and optimize public safety, regional collaboration and planning, efficient, equitable, and transparent public resource allocation, and effective regional public services for individuals and municipalities. The membership, self-evident, so I'll skip over that, but you can find the power provisions explicitly enumerated at the bottom of page 1, breaking to page 2. This is subsection C and of section 1. And let's see. The committee shall study and make recommendations to the General Assembly on how to improve the structure and organization of county and regional government, including, I'm just going to list a few items here. Enhancement and optimization of public safety, enhancement of regional collaboration and planning, efficient, equitable, and transparent allocation of public resources, promotion of effective regional public services for individuals and municipalities, clarification of the role and oversight of elected county officials and their departments, reduction of duplicated public services and promotion of opportunities for intermunicipal collaboration, balance of availability and cost of services across municipalities in each county, mechanisms of county and regional government structures in other states, and impact of climate change and resiliency on the maintenance of public infrastructure, delivery of regional government services, and coordination of regional emergency planning. The other power this committee has is a contracting one. The committee, through the Joint Fiscal Office, may contract with one or more consultants to assist with research preparation of the report and other assistance with the committee's work deemed necessary by the committee. That report just mentioned is due on or before November 1st, 2025, so the November after this. So that report shall be delivered to the House and Senate committees on government operations. The meetings, I should just add, let's see. Legislators are permitted, are entitled to per diem for not more than 10 meetings. And the committee shall cease to exist on July 1st, 2026. So 6 months after the report's due. Any questions about, pause right there for a moment. Okay. The next part of the bill has to do with the Technical Advisory Committee and Technical Advisory Group. That is formally called the County and Regional Governance Technical Advisory Group, which shall analyze the subject matter being considered by this study committee and advise, assist, and provide recommendations to the study committee, specifically on the structure and organization of county and regional government. Let's see, this group, there are certain select individuals and entities that are invited to participate in the group, including the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, State Court Administrator, Vermont Association of County Judges, Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association, Vermont League of Cities and Towns, the Vermont Regional Development Corporations, the Vermont School Boards Association, the Vermont Town and City Management Association, and any other relevant stakeholders identified by the technical advisory group, so they're able to invite other entities in. Also, I should just note that they're essentially on call. If this committee has any specific questions, they can just reach out to that technical advisory group whenever they'd like. The third section of the bill has to do with that report from the Secretary of Administration, and on or before September 15th, 2024, so a little bit less than a month from now, the Secretary of Administration or designee shall report to this study committee on federal funding opportunities resulting from the disaster declaration for the major flooding events of 2023 in the state, including the received federal funds, the status of pending applications for funding, and potential avenues for additional funds. And the Secretary or designee shall provide an analysis of the impact of Vermont's lack of robust county or regional governance on the receipt of federal emergency funding. And that summarizes everything.
There's one thing I want to add that is not in this bill, but is in another bill that numbers of them, but there are two other study committees that are happening right now that they're not legislative study committees, but I believe one is being is the committee that's working on the dispatch issue and how to make recommendations for improving our emergency dispatch system and emergency communications. And then there's another committee that I'm not sure if it's gotten started yet. It's about EMS and emergency medical services. And I believe it's in the EMS bill references this committee, saying that that committee needs to sort of coordinate with what we're doing. So I just want to make one of the things that we may want to do in future meetings is have representatives from those two committees come in and talk with us, so that we are not recommending things that are counter to what else is being recommended in those committees, especially when it comes to regional emergency services. So I just wanted to note that. I don't think you drafted the EMS bill.
That wasn't me.
Yeah, but you remember this, Mike, right?
Yeah, so we essentially, rather than create a brand new committee, we reimagined the existing EMS board and
Oh,
gave them
right,
a
okay.
new set of tasks. And so I'm trying to remember exactly how explicit we were, but I think regardless of what was in the bill itself, we should include that in our.
Yeah, that was a Senate GovOps amendment to that bill, is that we reference this committee so that there's coordination between the two committees. Are there any questions about the enabling legislation?
I
Yeah,
have a quick one. I mentioned in the introduction was, do we know when or if we ever had county government in the state of Vermont and when it was removed or?
That's a good question. I have not really done an in-depth exploration of the legal history behind county governance here, just kind of taking a look at it. At least since the 70s, really when the last restructuring of the Constitution. Before that, I'd have to take a deeper look, but we certainly do that.
I'm just curious in case anybody else is as to why we lost it, if we did have it. I mean,
Well, I think we do have it. It's just very, very tiny is my understanding, because there are county taxes, at least in our county, there are county taxes that are and there's a county budget that the side judges approve.
There certainly are.
Is
I'd be
that,
happy to walk through that in
Okay.
a few minutes too, looking at the memo.
yeah. Well, if there are no questions on the legislation itself, why don't we turn to the memo, which does sort of start to get into this conversation about structure of county government. That would be great.
And so committee members, you should have access to a brief memo I put together, which serves as just a real thumbnail sketch of the status of county level governance here. And I just want to take a moment and differentiate that between statewide governmental entities that have kind of regional qualities or in really what this memo is focusing on is really county governance that is either jurisdictionally limited to a county or set up specifically for county services. And so not only will we be looking at the brief and fairly limited existing structure of that, but also some of the legal underpinnings of that in the Constitution, some other legal doctrines that may be involved in both the restructuring of county governance, if that is what the committee wants, as well as, depending on what that restructuring looks like, may bring in some other doctrines to be considered later on. One thing I just want to note is that the very last page of this is a working list. Don't claim that it's exhaustive at all. Just a working list of Vermont regional governmental entities. I'm not going to go into the structure of each one of these, but if there are any specific questions, I'm certainly happy to unpack any of these in subsequent memo or oral brief for the committee. And this is just a list that myself and some of the other attorneys, who's just kind of picking their brains in the office, came up with. So I believe, well, happy to add to it if anybody else brings anything up. I'm sure there's something that was missed along the way. But anyways, turning back to the memo, the body of the memo itself, the first section, existing county governance, is in Vermont is rather limited. And I think it's worth the committee's time just to actually read verbatim a very succinct description of county government in its modern form that is really since Constitution was tweaked in 74. I have to double check that date. But here by the Supreme Court, in a case called Town of Stowe, the Lamoille County. The Vermont County is a unit of special functions. It operates as an electoral district for assistant judges, state's attorneys, sheriffs, as well as, in some cases, state senators and probate judges. It is a judicial district for the Superior Court and some probate court systems, and maintains courthouses facilities. It also has certain administrative responsibilities in connection with its own functions. A county has no territory which it governs.
in the sense that the state or the town governs. It passes neither statutes nor ordinances. All of its territories are overlain with state sovereignty and underlain with the contiguous town government. Then also that case goes on to point out the weakness of the powers of county government. The limited nature of the county government's governmental operations carries with it a further restriction. Since this agency has no generalized government function, any implication of power with respect to carrying out functions it has been assigned must be viewed as correspondingly abridged. A municipality may have to resort to fairly broad application of police power in a limited geographical context, since it is a true governing body, and speaks of the county government. Its limits are set by the state and by the state's own existence of that same police power. No such broad-based exercise of authority is contemplated for a county. So that, I think, pretty much sets the table of it's really not much there in its current state. That being said, there is a lot of detail, even if county governance is somewhat contained in its current structure. As the Supreme Court pointed out, it namely possesses both elements of the executive branch and the judicial as well. And it's worth to reiterate here that there's no legislative function. So you don't see counties passing county ordinances really. Although we get into a little bit later, there is some taxing that comes up, the assistant judges. The lower or superior courts are broken up essentially along county lines according to statute. And straddling the judiciary and the executive are those assistant judges or side judges, which are also referred to for not only judges, but also administrators in county government. That is really county courthouses and some infrastructure and staff that we see in other county offices, like some elements of sheriff's departments. Assistant judges are authorized by statute to set county budgets and essentially level taxes. They're a little more complicated that they really assess, and then there's other warrants that go out. But indeed, there's a county tax as well. There are numerous county level executive officers, including the county clerk, the county treasurer, county auditor, high bailiff, sheriff, and state's attorney. Some, like these sheriffs and state's attorneys, have significant duties and role across county government. Others, such as high bailiffs and county auditors, have little to no duties. High bailiff being the special circumstance of really almost being a figurehead. It's also worth to note that some of those are appointed and some of those are elected. In fact, those elected officials are constitutional officers, meaning their existence and election to office is guaranteed by the Vermont Constitution, which has certain implications if you want to remove those individuals, really being of their own volition, by the voters, or by impeachment, which we saw last summer. Let's see, and I should say that although these offices are contained at the county level, they nevertheless are integrated into state governance as well through statewide oversight offices, including the state court administrator or the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs. They're also integrated with the state governance structure through funding of some of their operations, classification of some of their employees, county employees, and the retirement system for employees as well. And I'll just pause right there and say that a lot of this, I've provided hyperlinks to some of the relevant statutes. But if you want a real deep dive as to what existing duties are for those county level officers and offices, I would point you towards Title 24 VSA Chapter 5. That's where they're all listed out there, as well as some other things, but that's where we'll find the meat of this, of the statutes at hand. I'll pause there. Are there any questions about?
Senator Harrison?
I just wanted to, Senator Norris had a question about what we used to have in the state. So did it change to be less impactful or have less authority, that 1976, 74?
I would have to look back prior to the 70s and really do a deep historical analysis of this. I know that many of these positions have been around since the inception of the state. In fact, some may be categorized as holdovers, like the High Bailiff. There's one interesting argument, and I've linked to a memo there of whether it was a drafting error that enables them to continue to exist. But certainly sheriffs have been around since the conception of the state, know exactly what those duties have been. Although the constitutional officers, duties for these county level positions are set by statute. There's not necessarily inherent duties that each office has, although like common sense, you'd think that sheriffs have historically always had a public safety and law enforcement elements to their role. Same for clerks, always dealing with elections here. And that's actually something I should pause and point out that there's an elections facet to some of the county governments through the county clerks there too for senatorial districts. There's some overlap there and then some recount too. But I would have to say it's probably best generally described county level governance is about public safety and law enforcement. But to your original question, to see exactly what has changed or if it's really changed that radically, I'd have to do deeper look at history.
Okay.
So turning to the next part of the memo having to do with some of the constitutional elements and legal doctrines at play. There are a few constraints on the possible reconstruction of county governance by the Vermont Constitution or other applicable legal doctrines. My initial review of the law. There's really one pertinent section of the Constitution that lays out the powers of the General Assembly when it comes to counties. And that can be found in Chapter 2, Section 6, labeled legislative powers. Amongst the various other legislative powers, the General Assembly may prepare bills and enact them into laws, redress grievances, grant charters of incorporation, constitute towns, boroughs, cities, and counties. And really that italicized language right there is the salient language. The ability of the General Assembly to constitute towns, boroughs, cities, and counties really implies that there is that plenary power that we see solely in the General Assembly to create counties, modify them similar to other political subdivisions like towns and municipalities, what we typically often see. But in part of that plenary power, not only can they create, modify, dissolve, we also have implications similar to Dillon's rule, where we have that all power of granted to all power possessed by municipalities is granted explicitly to them through charter or statute by the General Assembly, and therefore can be removed or modified as well. Now, I do want to point out that Dillon's rule it was conceived and really is directed towards the idea of municipalities here, but I believe there's essentially kind of parallel legal principles here operating for the county level. That is that the General Assembly can create, modify, and dissolve county governance as it sees fit, and that really there's no inherent county level power under our constitutional construction as we have it here, and which the Supreme Court in that Lamoille County case went through pains to really point out and make clear for posterity. Let's see, other items I should point out. It's worth noting that the Vermont Constitution only really makes 4 other direct references to the word county. And those are really either related to redistricting for representatives and senators, or mere offhand references to county level officers, so assistant judges and county clerks. There are some record keeping elements that come up as far as the county clerks holding deeds and other kind of property records as well, but that's pretty brief. And I should say, talk about home rule, and that's maybe I'll just kind of leave it there and opening for questions right now. I know that there's some kind of, although it's a brief memo, some density to the writing here, but I'm happy to kind of unpack it as the committee would like.
Are there questions on the memo for Senator Norris?
Thank you. Getting back to Stouffville Memorial, down at the bottom of the paragraph, starting with further if county government, those next 4 lines, could you just briefly discuss those again and then tell me exactly what that means? Further, if county governments were to be granted.
Sorry, what page of the memo?
The last
page. Okay. Oh,
Next to the last
further, county government, okay. If county governments were to be granted any kind of legislative power, such grant would be subject to the non-delegation doctrine. Thank you. Senator Norris for reminding me of this. I did skip that. That is, the non-delegation doctrine is where the General Assembly may delegate broad legislative authority to counties if that delegation does not encroach on core legislative function and is accompanied by appropriate limitations. So this occurs with commonly with state agencies in the rulemaking powers, as well as at the local level where we have municipalities with the charter granted ordinance creating powers. And the non-delegation doctrine comes in where essentially there has to be guardrails put on that delegation of legislative authority granted to those political subdivisions of the state. And really there has to be limitations and guidance is how the courts typically put it. So it can't be something like the municipality can do whatever they want. That's too broad. It's really kind of more like the state will create uniform statutes, and then if there's any sort of minutia or small detail to kind of fill in the cracks, something like that can be delegated to be determined by either state agency or the local equivalent. Right, so in the county context here, there is currently no legislative authority granted to counties. If really there wanted this committee were interested in exploring that idea, really any sort of legislative powers to be granted them would have to be very precise as far as topics and limitations and process for those being brought about at the county level. I'm just gonna maybe leave it there.
So just a quick follow-up.
Sure.
So in this 1976 ruling, is it my understanding that the Supreme Court did leave an opening or to enable legislation to recognize county government once again, as long as they set guardrails around what they're doing?
Sure. That case was looking at whether counties actually had authority to tax in this limited sense, and they said, yes, you do. But in doing that, they really said, while we're on the topic, this is really the only thing they can do. The state legislature hasn't really provided them the powers to do really much else or anything at all. But what they didn't say is that the state legislature is prohibited from doing that. I read that case as very much allowing the legislature, if wanted, to tweak, expand, even pare down further, really having a wide flexibility and berth to create governance at the county level, however it wishes.
Thank you.
Tim, would it be fair to say that the authority that we have in the Constitution, the General Assembly has in the Constitution toward counties is similar to what we have with any municipality or I think we're used to on the GovOps committees being in the business of saying, okay, a town may adopt these certain ordinances and a town may do these things. We haven't done that kind of delegation of authority in a broad way to a county or a regional entity, but we create municipalities that have legislative authority every year and dissolve them in some years.
Yes, I think that's a very fair characterization.
But there's nothing that says these are the counties and they must be this way that's written into the Constitution.
No, interestingly, the counties are listed out by statute in beginning of Title 24, Chapter 1, and then elsewhere by statute, the towns are assigned counties essentially. Interestingly enough, the counties, I don't believe are listed out in the Constitution, but yeah, I'm trying to recall.
Yeah, they're not,
Yeah.
yeah, we could change the number and the names if
Right.
we wanted to.
Nothing I've encountered in my research indicates that.
And I just want to point out on the back of the memo is a list that you started about all the regional government entities in Vermont,
Yes.
which is a really interesting list.
And so the first category is local regional government entities, and I should actually say at the very bottom of the list are those existing county officers and offices that just mentioned in the memo. At the top, we have local regional government entities, which really anything that crosses the municipal, more than one municipal line. In fact, some of these are considered municipalities in and of themselves. And then the second grouping, we have state regional governmental entities, really just state entities which may break up administration into subparts based on, sometimes counties, some things that look like counties, just not at all, kind of regional overlays with counties, or that do not overlay with counties at all. And then, let's see, I tracked down most of the statutory references here, but certainly the second batch, which is kind of some hyperlinks to the agency's webpage to provide general information. I'm happy to provide additional detail as to how these various entities work if wanted, or answer any other particular questions, but right now it just exists as a list, and again, perhaps a not complete list.
Yeah, and I think Doug you had a staff member who was working on a map of this kind of thing so I think in a future meeting, we'll have a map that we can look at that sort of visualizes the complexity of this. And I know with Senate districts, we represent multiple towns, and there are towns in my Senate district that are sort of on the fringes that are in multiple different of these. So it's not always very neat, like they might be in a different county, in a different CUD, in a different regional planning district, and sometimes they're not really sure where they are, which thing they're supposed to be with. And a lot of these are the border towns that are on the edges of a county. So for example, the classic one that I hear from a lot that it gets confused as to which entity it's involved with is Huntington, because they are in the Addison Senate District, the Lincoln County District, and the Washington House Districts. And then they are in different CUDs and different regional planning commissions. So it's not always, especially for towns like that, it can be really, really confusing and also contradictory because those regional entities are not always working in concert with each other. So I think having that visualization of the map that you we had a great map when we were talking about the dispatch that Senator Watson, you remember Senator Watson's dispatch map? And it really showed how confusing the dispatch system is. that's just one system, let alone like multiples that are overlapping with each other. So, yeah, go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about this and some of the things that, we heard are not working, I think about where the political unit, the number of towns that are grouped together in a particular catchment area for the provision of some service, right? So, you've got your towns that have, decided to contract for dispatch services with a particular entity there's not a thoughtful strategic plan that went into that. It's kind of been a market-based thing that's just sort of cobbled together. And now we're trying to think through how do we get from this patchwork we have to somewhere else. And the things we have to think about are governance and finance that are tough. So it's like, who gets to make the decision about how it gets paid for and what the future is? And at what level is that? Is that towns coming together to all split a budget on some shared service? Because that's what a lot of these entities are, right? Waste management, for instance, is a bunch of towns getting together and having this multi-jurisdictional entity that provides a specific service and they get charged a proportional fee for it. Is that what dispatch is going to look like? I mean, these are the,
Yeah.
And so we have all these different ways that we've solved these different service provision problems. And they don't, some of them work really well and some of them are, not working anymore. Maybe they did at one time.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna talk a little bit more about money later, but I think also it can be really expensive or inefficient financially to have the overlapping governmental structures often, because the fee structures are different, the services are different, and oftentimes you're just paying more because of the way that it's structured. And if it's a cleaner system that it often could be potentially more efficient financially, or that's something we'll explore for sure in future meetings. But and if there are things that are not on this list that we think should be on the list or on the map, we should, there are things that are missing. Let's make sure we get them on the list. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a map is a great idea.
Yeah.
It'll be quite a map too. There'll be a lot of layers to it.
Yeah.
But that's a great idea. The only thing I could think of was the conservation districts and the development credit corporations, and as other entities, but I really, really appreciate this list. I was trying to think of how to, just start to work on this, and the lists are really important. And if we might get this at the next meeting or when we get the information from the administration about federal funding, but it would be good to know what federal funding, all of the different categories that are done by county. That would be helpful to know, because I understand that is the case in the disaster relief, but then I think of other things like health data that is done on a county basis. So that's a challenge that I heard about recently, where our health districts are not the same as counties. And so they have a really hard time interpreting the health data because it's a different geographical area than our health districts. So that's just, another thing that could probably be streamlined, because I think we'll find places where we can have, less expense overall.
Yeah.
And find ways to do that. And then just a question on the authority of the county, the side judges to make the annual budget, because the way I understood it was they do have a public process. They have to do it in public. But then they create a budget and approve it. And then they send the municipalities a bill. That's how it works in our area. I don't know if that's how it works everywhere else. And then the municipalities don't have a choice. They just have to pay it and explain it to the public. But is that how it works everywhere else? And I guess, is there a limit on the types of things that the side judges can include in that budget?
Right, first question, yes, I believe that's the uniform process across all counties. The second, item of what can they budget for? I'm not sure if that's spelled out in statute. I have to check. It's at least implied that it's really for overhead when it comes to building expenses and operations. There's also not only county courthouses, but to complicate further, not all courthouses are county because some county courthouses are held in state buildings, so they put other their monies provided elsewhere. Let's see, but there are, I think, counties are also responsible for the costs of some of the sheriff's buildings and some sheriff staffers, then pay for some of the appointed individuals and then their own salaries as well. But I'll double check to see if there's a real limiting list on that. I don't think there is off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll definitely spend time talking about money. Yeah.
I just have a question, Tim. Well, can you give me an example of a union municipal district? I know the school union district, but what?
Right. Let's see.
Waste management districts.
Union municipal district. I'd have to double check. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, no, that's fine. Just, I've never heard that term before or that municipal district union before, so.
They are municipal corporations for service delivery. I just clicked on your hyperlink.
Yes. And let's see, what are their powers? Okay, they can contract, borrow money or indebtedness, for infrastructure projects, it looks like. Let me see if I can actually find an example of one.
That's interesting. It
Yeah,
could be
I hadn't
useful.
heard of them either, but they are,
I'm 99% sure that districts that are like the Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District, I think is an example of one of these. I think that's the,
It may be an umbrella term,
yeah.
much like a fire district can be actually a sewer district or a water district, but they just go by the term fire district.
and there's a list of the powers and duties and everything that they can do, so.
I noted it looked like that particular statute hasn't been amended since 2003. That gives that overarching definition, so.
Yeah, and it was created in 1969, so.
And indeed, it looks like the Chittenden Solid Waste District is a union municipal district.
That's how I was reading the line, but you were saying solid waste districts could be formed as union municipal districts, yeah.
But they could be for other things too, obviously, right? So that's good to know.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so I think the point of this list in part is to show that we have a lot of different structures and they may not all be the most effective or efficient or equitable or transparent structures. I think a lot of people get confused as to who's delivering their services. A lot of like regular Vermonters get confused as to who's delivering their services, let alone the town structure, the town employees themselves or town officials themselves get confused. Okay, any other questions for Tim at the moment? We do have scheduled in the agenda a break right now, so is everybody able to take a little bit of break, maybe 10 minutes? Okay, 10 minutes and then come back, and we are going to start by scheduling our next meeting so they can get on everybody's calendars. And we are going to do that not live on YouTube because we're going to be talking about our own personal calendars. And so it's just scheduling after a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back live to talk about the funding discussion.